Okay. Good afternoon, everyone present here at 7th edition of the Saturday seminar by Department of Philosophy, University of Lucknow. And today we have a talk on topic Nature of Thought by Professor P.R. Bhatt, retired professor from IIT Bombay. I, Mansi Vash, research scholar, welcome you all on the behalf of our head and department. Now, I would like to present a brief introduction of our today's speaker, Professor P.R. Bhatt. Dr. Parmeshwar Ram Bhatt did his graduation and post-graduation in philosophy from Karnataka University, Dharwad. He did his PhD from IIT Kanpur in January 1980 and joined IIT Bombay as lecturer. He became head in 2001 and completed his term in 2004. He retired in 2016 as a professor and continued as emeritus fellow till June 2019. He taught several philosophy courses to undergraduate and postgraduate students and supervised 11 PhD students. He has authored about 50 research papers and presented seminars nationally and internationally. He has joined author he has jointly authored two books. One is Psychoanalysis as a Human Science Beyond Foundationalism, and another is In Defense of Liberal Pluralism. He served as a member of several expert committees in philosophy, and he was also a member of Indian Council of Philosophical Research for 2 terms. Thank you. And now I would like to call Shivangi Sharma, a research scholar from our department, for presenting an abstract to today's talk.
Thank you, Mansi. The Nature of Thought by P.R. Bhatt, IIT Bombay. Thought is central to many philosophical discussions. Thought will be involved whenever we observe something sensually, read, hear, see, make statements, describe, utterances in communicating something. Even when we remember, imagine, or conceive something, our thoughts would be involved. Thoughts are so close to us, we have them all the time with us when we are conscious. Thoughts are related with meanings, ideas, concepts, statements, propositions, cognitions, etc., in one way or the other. We make an attempt to show the nature of thoughts in relation to other important philosophical problems they give rise to. The following issues would be taken up for discussion. Number one, are the laws of thought natural laws or mental laws or conventional laws? We find that laws of thought are not natural laws like gravitational law or Boyle's law. They do not appear to be mental laws even. If that were the case, one could not have thought illogically ever. They seem to be conventionally accepted laws of reasoning. Number two, one is born solipsist, but he may be socialized. Core aspect of socializing is acquiring a language. Thus, language is a crucial social institution through which one could achieve intersubjectivity. Point number three, we know what role performance is. This enables us to distinguish a character in a drama or film from character of a person. Mixing up these two would lead to utter failure of understanding. Point number four. In philosophical discourses, we invoke the concept of language games. These do help us to clarify and distinguish the difference between a natural language and a language game. The meaning of a word in natural language could be different from technical meaning of the same word in a language game. For instance, fingering in the natural language of English is different from the function of fingering in Linux computer language. Point number five. We often speak about possible worlds, counterfactual statements, etc. But we do not have enough clarity when we define, for instance, what is metaphysical necessity, logical necessity, and physical necessity. Last, we make use of thought experiments to arrive at certain conclusions. We forget often that thought experiments involve stipulation and engage others in a specialized discourse. These thought experiments involve opening and closing principles. If we are not aware of them, we ask philosophically wrong questions. We need to distinguish between philosophically good thought experiments and bad thought experiments. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivangi. Now I would like to invite Professor K.C. Pandey, Head of Department of Philosophy, University of Lucknow, to present a formal welcome note. We welcome you, sir.
Respected Professor P.R. Bhatt, sir, teachers of philosophy, research scholars, and students. I am personally grateful to Professor P.R. Bhatt first because he accepted our invitation to deliver this talk, and he has been very busy these days, but still he accepted this invitation to interact also with the research scholars. This program is of research scholars, basically of Department of Philosophy, University of Lucknow, and it is open to all. So we all get benefit on this platform. So first of all, uh, I provide a bouquet of flowers in thought to our speaker, Professor P.R. Bhatt, sir. And I'm grateful to all the teachers of philosophy, lovers of philosophical reflections, those who have joined here, and those who might have been thinking to join this program and might not have joined, but they might join the next Saturday seminars. All the research scholars, those who have joined, are most welcome. It's their program, and I hope that they'll get benefited with this talk as well as they have been interacting with other scholars, other teachers, other resource persons, and students. Everybody related to this Saturday seminar, I uh, welcome, and we are going to have one study circle also soon in our department. Started with this Saturday seminar. That is what I have applied to ICPR to give some funds for some uh, study circle meetings. If it could materialize, then that will be wonderful. Then we'll have better Saturday seminar platforms, and I hope that research scholars are keeping note of the points raised during uh, these meetings, these seminars. With these words, I personally welcome Professor P.R. Bhatt, who has been very kind to visit our department uh, for, uh, for many occasions, like seminars and conferences and conducting viva voce examinations. So, respected sir, now please deliver your talk, sir. Now, dice is yours, sir.
Thank you, Professor Pandey, Mansi, and others. Uh, Dear students, Dr. Shukla, Professor Pandey, and all the people who have taken interest in this topic. I would like to discuss a certain kind of gap that I find in philosophical discussions and debates between a certain kind of, let us say, natural language on the one hand, and the artificial language or the specialized language on the other. Or sometimes I do kind of find difficulty in understanding certain arguments using thought experiments, certain arguments using possible worlds, certain arguments like so on ad infinitum. So all these things are very powerful tools which philosophers often use in developing their arguments and themes, especially in contemporary Western philosophy, as well as, of course, Indian philosophy. We do find that the tool of thought experiment is extensively used to make their arguments. And you could imagine from Plato onwards, we have been reading quite a few arguments involving thought experiments, possible worlds, counterfactual arguments, and so on. This has become too frequent, very much analytical in nature, and logical arguments, analysis are done, and big challenges are posed through these arguments. So all the students who are doing contemporary philosophy definitely should pay some attention to the point that I'm going to make today. I am making clear points initially, later on it becomes more and more difficult. So I have just listed down 6 points. They are not entirely different points. Basically, they are interconnected, and I hope that I'll be able to make the point clear. In case I don't succeed, you are very free to ask me questions, clarifications, and so on. And Professor Pandey has agreed to sort of help me in communicating the questions to me so that I can respond to your queries. Now, let me start with very important point to me, at least. We do talk about laws of thought. You might expect me to explain what is thought, which I'm not going to do, because as I think, thoughts are so close to us that we comparing it with anything else or defining it in terms of other terms would be defining easy terms in terms of very difficult one. So I will not do that. Okay. And I am saying that this is the thought centered or thought involved kind of philosophical activity that we do, and the problems philosophers do raise, defend, etc., etc. Now, let me make the point a little more clear. When we talk about laws, we tend to think that they are, laws of discovered by scientists and they belong to nature. True, that is what is the main sense of the term law. But of course, we could also find laws in linguistics. We could also find laws in economics and other social sciences and so on. But laws do talk about something that is objectively thought of. So Newton's laws are there, laws of chemistry are there, laws, you could, if you want to call them laws of geometry are there, and laws of logic are there, like tautologies, for example. And like that, we do talk about several laws. But when we talk about laws of thought, what is it that we really speaking about? Because, laws of thought are considered to be very fundamental to thinking or not only that, arguments, logic, and so on. So we talk about law of identity. Simply what it means, A is A. Everything is what it is. We have to grant that point straight away to begin thinking in any direction or understanding any utterances, any statement made, and so on. So law of identity is invariably required, and we have to admit that it is the most fundamental law. The other one which is talked about is law of contradiction. If P is a statement, P and not P is said to be contradictory. That means if you say someone is a boy and at the same time also say he is not a boy, then there is contradiction. P and not P, simply put in a symbolic manner. Yet another law is taken to be fundamental law of logic, thought, etc. That is law of excluded middle, where we say either it is P or not P, where P is a statement. That means I can use either or logical connectives in such a way that any statement I make, it should be correct, true. Because, when we connect it with either or, any one part, if it is true, the whole sentence is taken to be true in a logical definition of either or. So these three are taken very fundamental. Of course, there are certain individuals who think that the third one is not really strict law, because there could be slightly odd context where either or may not work at all. Say you can talk about someone. X is either speaking or not speaking. This law will apply there. Then, if unfortunately X has died yesterday, so then obviously this is an odd kind of statement. It doesn't apply to him at all. Therefore, it doesn't either true or, it won't be always true. Either he is speaking or not speaking. Though the statement is, either of or kind, and it would be true if one of the component is true, logically that remains, but the context may not be appropriate where it can apply. So some people question this particular law of thought on this kind of ground, but nevertheless, largely it is taken as law of thought, and people do take it to be valid. And then, of course, some people do talk about law of causation should be elevated to the status of law of thought, but there will be controversy. Not many would agree with this. At least these three are taken to be laws of thought, but some do raise further questions. If your thinking is totally governed by laws of thought, if you cannot deviate from them, whenever you perceive anything, whenever you talk about the world, they should be applying, because they are all, you use your thoughts in understanding the nature, in perceiving the things, in discussing about anything, and so on. Therefore, will it not be the case that laws of thought will automatically be laws of nature? If they are laws of nature, then you would be talking about them as necessary laws, because laws of nature are necessary anyway, and these fundamental laws of thought are also necessary. Otherwise you cannot use language, thought, any description, anything. No activity, intellectual activity is possible. Therefore, what is wrong in claiming that it is laws of reality? So if you say it is law of reality, then there will be a certain kind of problem. For example, when we talk about possible world, we could think of certain possibilities, like, some murder has taken place, and the one version is that it is not murder, it is a case of suicide. There could be another version where the complaint, the person who has complained, a relative of the person who has died, claims that it is a murder rather than suicide, or something of that kind. So there could be more than one views, and each perspective on the death of that individual could be, in a manner of speaking, a possibility. That is what the CID inspectors are exploring, to identify which one is the truth, which perspective is true, or yet another perspective has to be worked out, or things of that kind. So, a possible world is not the actual. It is contrasted with actual, all right, but it is not yet taken as actual when there are several possibilities. Similarly, when we talk about counterfactual situation, if Professor Pandey were not there, maybe the talk today would have been postponed, maybe something could have happened, somebody else could have introduced me or welcomed me, and so on. So these are all not factual. Yet you can talk about counterfactual situations which are, as a matter of fact, not true, but there are problems of certain kind. I am not going to get into that. Given the definition of material implication, when the premises are false, conclusion also is false, or whether it is true or no, it doesn't matter. The whole sentence is taken to be true in logic, and therefore counterfactual discussion also is true. But that is not ordinarily accepted. When we talk hypothetically, when we talk about possible worlds, when we talk about counterfactual situation, etc., we are using our autonomous way of thinking. We use our freedom and talk about certain possibilities, and we don't admit them to be as realities yet. But if we say that laws of thought applies to reality, which is the case, of course, all scientists do talk about that, they may not apply to fictional world, then laws of thoughts are not laws of realities. So that is the ground on which I try to reject laws of thoughts cannot be laws of reality. But laws of thoughts are involved in all our discussions of possible world, stipulated world, counterfactual situation, and so on. Or many more, like in novels, literary works, and so on. So, even mythologies and so on. So, laws of thought are involved, but laws of nature are not involved. So, that is my one argument. Then I move on to laws of thought as conventional laws. There's something that is taken for granted as almost tautology. In logic, tautologies are laws of logic. So in an argument, if you have to derive conclusion and you need some steps to be derived, and that you can do easily using tautologies, then you can invoke the tautology as premise. You can add the premise without hurting the thrust of the argument, without creating any fallacies. So tautologies are laws. They are always true in a technical sense, and you can use them, invoke them as step in the deductive argument. So they are taken to be conventionally true. What does it mean? Well, logic has certain axioms. Axioms are taken to be true, and therefore, if you say that tautologies are logical tautologies and they are laws, they are conventionally accepted laws. In that sense, I would say even laws of thoughts are laws. So let me now move on to another important but again very connected theme, that is a child is born solitary. That means a child, when it starts responding, it responds to its environment, and when it responds, some of them could be just biological responses, like when child had its feed, it might have got enough energy, it moves its legs, hands, head, and so on. Some of the biological experts would say that that is because the child wants to do exercises, blood circulation will be very good, and then digestive system will work well, and the child will grow. Cells are multiplying, and therefore, if blood circulation is affected, its growth is hampered, so it needs to move around whatever way it can. And when it grows further, cells multiply very rapidly, children grow very fast, then it would start responding, recognizing, say the mother, father, or sister, and some close relatives do lift the child. Before lifting also, they do communicate. In other words, try to communicate. Not necessarily they do communicate, and they may call the name of the person, maybe, or maybe baby talk they start, whatever, but the child responds to the smile, the sound, the visual look, or hands, and so on. And this kind of reaction, interaction, physical, takes place initially. In some sense, child understands who is a familiar person, who is not. If an uncle visits, wants to interact with the baby might just turn its head. Not baby might avoid looking at it and look at the familiar face, something of that kind. Little later, the person wants to lift the baby might refuse to go, and by forcefully, if the person lifts, it might cry, it might show tension on its face, and so on. Definitely, there is communication taking place. Communication is, of course, after the thinking going on, the child thought first and then responded. So reaction is maybe thoughtless, but these are all voluntary reactions. And if there is a language that you can talk about, solipsist language, the child is using that language. Then, of course, it will pick up maybe one word here and there, mama, or food it might give some, or milk something it might use. Certain sounds it repeats, and the elders associate with something, and later on that word might be one word sentence, and so on. The child will pick up the baby language, and that is familiar to mother, father, sister, and so on. And later on, the child will learn the sentences and so on. The language is picked up, and language is picked up using earlier, of course, five sense organs maybe, and later on certain patterns in the reality, certain patterns in the behavior, and so on. So laws of nature do apply to things. And the solid toy, for example, the child will learn that it can be caught. And then, of course, as you might have noticed, all children would like to eat the toy. It straight away goes to the mouth. And then certain things they would have tasted, and they perhaps even try to taste the toy also. They might learn later on that it cannot be tasted, it is not palatable, it can't be eaten, and chocolate and other things it would have tasted. So it will start distinguishing toy from eatables and so on. Like this, vocabularies also will be because the child who is a solipsist now might have learned certain sentences like one word sentences, come, go, give me, things of that kind. And then it has started using public language. And elders have learned, know already that language, slowly socializing the child into the social norms along with the language. So through language, the person has learned how to communicate, what is the agreement, where parents are agreeing, where parents do not agree, etc., etc. All these things are learned, and the rules of the language also is learned. Chomsky has pointed out that in 48 months, any baby, normal baby, would acquire the language, full language. Full language meaning thereby all the grammatical rules, all the rules that are used in communicating with the child and so on, and vocabulary, that has to be acquired. Full vocabulary it may not know. That will come slowly even till the end of one's life. So, yeah. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir. Audible very much.
Yes,
Everything
sir.
like.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the other point I'm talking about. The solipsist child will become the one of the member of the society, learn to use the institution of language, and now we can move on to the other part of the point that I'm trying to make. That is, I can go to the straight away language game point. Okay, the natural language has been learned, and the child might be introduced to certain games. Children do play games, and through games they learn many things. And if the child is introduced to the game of football, or maybe little later game of chess, the child will learn that the rules of chess, where let us say there is an elephant, the real elephant is part of the nature, and the real elephant will follow Newton's law. Obviously, if it slips it will fall down. Hello, you are able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Everything fine.
Oh, fine. And the spatial language that the child has learnt is, there is a conventional within the language, of course, there is a convention of using the chess pieces in a certain way. The queen will move in a certain way, the minister will move in a certain way, or the soldiers will move in a certain way. And all these things he or she would learn, and that is applicable only to the chess. It doesn't apply elsewhere. So a language game of, let us say, chess is a specialized kind of language, but it could be learned only if you know some natural language. You have to learn these specialized rules and specialized language. To learn that particular thing, you need a natural language. So that Wittgenstein talks about several language games of cooking, language games of different games, of course, language games of drama, language games of, like that. There are several language games. So all these language games are specialized languages. They are connected to, the main language, mother tongue, and there could be several languages, of course, and they are also interconnected. You could not have learned a language game if you had not known a natural language. Here again, there is that kind of link, and if that link is not there, it will be isolated calculus or a language which nobody can understand. And then there is the other role performance. Here again, a specialized language is used. A specialized language which let us say if we are talking about a drama, there is a character, drama, mythological drama of Ram story, or the some drama written on Ram and Lakshman, Vanavas, or whatever. So there, the role playing, somebody has to play the role of Ram. When he is playing the role of Ram, of course, he is eldest son of Dasharatha. And he is married and he has Sita as his wife. But in his natural state, he might be a bachelor. He may not be a married person at all. He may not have any children. So you cannot apply what is true of the character of Ram, that is, he is husband of Sita, in his normal life, and he should not say that you are married. I know, of course, I have seen your drama. You can't be saying that. That would be misuse of language. So the special drama or the role played in a film, etc., has to be kept separate. It is a specialized language. In a context only it is true, not outside that context. Then I just mentioned the other kinds of things which I talked about earlier, mentioned earlier, possible worlds, counterfactual statements, and things of that kind. And also, some kinds of arguments. Anyway, let me introduce why I'm speaking about this. When we said in a possible world, Aristotle could have been my teacher. Instead of being born in, Greece and so on, ancient times, Aristotle could have been born in this century. He could have been a professor in IIT Kanpur maybe, or he could have been a professor in Karnataka University Philosophy Department. I could have been his student. So when we advance possible world argument, let's say the kind of argument which Kripke keeps using in developing his own thesis, of course, possible world argument, and then, of course, Quine, who thinks that, well, why do you call him Aristotle? Then somebody might say, well, Aristotle has these properties, and in a possible world, if he has similar properties, he should be called, well, Aristotle. Otherwise, not. How can he be Aristotle? He was born centuries ago. Aristotle was teacher of Alexander, but you cannot say Alexander also is not there. How can he be similar to this possible world? So there cannot be Aristotle in this possible world. But somebody might say that, look, when you are using a possible world and when you are using the name of a person in the actual world, living person, okay, then the possible world is very meaningful. So he can talk about, for example, Rajendra Prasad, who happens to be my teacher, in a possible world. Rajendra Prasad in possible world was not a professor at IIT Kanpur. He was professor at IIT Delhi. If that is the description of Rajendra Prasad in a possible world, then obviously Coin would ask the question, no, then he was not your teacher in a possible world. So, therefore, how can it be the case that Rajendra Prasad is a counterpart or a person in this stipulated world? So, Kripke uses the notion of rigid designator where he will say a proper name would designate the same person in different, even counterfactual situation, possible worlds, and so on. And you don't have to find criteria to identify the person in different possible worlds. The argument goes in a particular direction where proper name definitely points to the same person in a possible world if he exists there. So if my teacher exists in a possible world, and if we are talking about Professor Rajendra Prasad, then obviously he is also existing in that possible world. So a possible world, though it is a stipulated world, it will be possible to talk about, and it has to be linked to the actual world, and that link, according to Kripke, etc., is made through such rigid designators and so on. But I would like to point out here the possible world is used by philosophers long, long ago. For example, Leibniz and even Aristotle, when they talk about logic, the metaphysical necessity, they declare it to be a statement which is true in all possible world. If possible world is simply stipulated, simply fiction of our imagination, we are not making any point by saying that they are true in all possible worlds. All that it could mean is we have stipulated in all the possible world that that statement is true. The very spirit of claiming this is a metaphysically necessary statement. So what should be done, as far as I could see, is a possible world is a stipulation, all right. It is a stipulation in such a manner that all laws of nature known to us or true are true even in these possible worlds. If laws of nature also stipulated to be different than the way they are in the actual world, then it is pure fiction of your imagination. No argument would be forceful, as far there is not an occasion to develop that thesis further, but I'm trying to tell you that this is what is important to note. Similarly, laws of thought, they too have to be applicable when you work out a possible world. So even in counterfactual situation, even in a possible world, stipulated possible world, even in a thought experiment where if possible world is involved, you need to grant that laws of nature are applicable there. But if you say laws of thought or laws of nature, then you cannot construct a possible world at all. Then that is has to apply, and then obviously all things will follow. Your fictional world also has to be declared as real. So that problem arises. That is the reason why I segregate the possible world from the real world, but possible world will contain all laws of nature, will apply there also. And for example, Putnam doesn't agree with me. He says you can stipulate a possible world where laws have undergone changes. Like in your dream, the gravitational force might undergo change. You are falling from a building, you thought you will die, but you slowly land on you land on somewhere and you are not dead. You are alive. You are surprised to know how come you are alive. But this can happen in a dream, which is totally stipulated world. Whereas possible world, if you take that way, argument will be useless. I am therefore avoiding that kind of possible world. And metaphysician, when he says the metaphysical truth is necessary in all possible world, he means that it is true in all possible world where all the laws of nature do apply, and this is exactly where counterfactual situation we discuss, where we talk about several theories about a murder and which one will be taken as true eventually, and somebody is punished, given a capital punishment after investigation, let us say, and after the proper legal procedure, then obviously that particular perspective will be a perspective where all laws of nature are duly applicable. So metaphysical statements are necessary not in a fictional possible world, but only in all true possible worlds where these laws are applicable. So I talk about, of course, in my own some publications, plausible world. Possible world, not I distinguish from plausible worlds, which of course follow all laws of nature. So therefore, logical necessity, which is fictional world, in fictional world also you can talk about tautologies, etc. That is entirely different. But laws of thought are tautologies at a certain level. Therefore, if we are using laws even in constructing plausible world, well, that is very fine. And logical necessity, you can talk about. Logical necessity will include many things. Tautology, of course, is one. You can also talk about analytic statements, which are logically necessary, conceptual relations, which are logically necessary. For example, all living beings, okay, need oxygen. So that is also is a necessary statement, but they are conceptually related. So like this, there are several necessary statements, but they are true. They are true in their own domain, maybe. They are true in the real world also sometimes. It all depends on the whether they are applicable and so on. But we could distinguish between metaphysical necessity, logical necessity, and third one is physical necessity. Physical necessity is in the physical world, actual world. Laws of nature say water flows from higher altitude to lower altitude. If a river is flowing, it necessarily flows from higher altitude to lower altitude. This is a physical necessity. And if you're floating in that river, you will be also going down towards the sea. So, physical necessity, logical necessity, and metaphysical necessity, all three are necessities of a certain kind, but they are different. Now, let me move on to the last point, which is for me very important and often research scholars have to take note of. For example, thought experiments. I don't know whether you heard of research scholars. Yes, must have done already their MA, some courses and so on. You might have heard of several thought experiments. Hundreds of them are there, and some books list quite a few, more than 100 even. So Putnam's twin earth, okay, water on earth and twin earth, and Russell's, the whole world is created just 5 minutes ago, but with all its complexities, exactly the way you remember, for example. You remember yesterday what has happened. With that kind of memory, you are also created exactly the way you are just 5 minutes back. So this is not a falsifiable statement. Some people do raise this as an objection to, you know, um, the falsifiability criterion, okay, of Popper, for example, and ship of Theseus, or my grandfather's bicycle. There is no part of grandfather's bicycle remaining in my cycle. Every part is changed. So there is no identity remaining. Then what is that cycle you call as grandfather's cycle? Ship example also is the same. Every part is replaced over the years. There is no ship, no old part of the ship remains today, yet you call it is the same ship. Okay. And for example, Mimamsakas use the argument of, Swata Pramanyavada, where they talk about if you try to justify knowledge, K1, you need something else, another knowledge to justify it. That will be K2. And if K2 is not justified, it cannot be a justification. So you need K3 and so on till infinity. You cannot reach infinity. Therefore, you can't use this argument at all. This process goes to infinity, but you cannot go to infinity. Therefore, the argument is fallacious. You cannot justify any knowledge using another knowledge. So, therefore, knowledge is self-justified. Therefore, Swata Then there is also the argument from Jambi. What it says, Jambi is a physical exactly like me or like you. A zombie is a creature only consisting of material thing, yet it has all the human things, including, your thoughts, feelings, this, that, etc. So you suppose like that and give the argument, can human being be different from the zombie? How can he be different? So reductionism is true. That is what the attempt, physicalism is true. That is what the attempt of materialist and trying to reject the mind as a separate category. So Descartes is wrong, let us say. That is what is the point they want to make. In all these thought experiments, mind you, one important point, if you note, you could immediately catch the mistake of the argument, misleading argument very easily. What should you do? I have mentioned earlier, Ram, he is married in Ramayana, that is, in the drama of Ram or film on Ram and so on. But the person who plays that role would be a bachelor. You can't be saying you're a married person. You cannot be marrying now anybody else unless you have given divorce to your earlier wife. So the Indian law doesn't apply to him at all because he is not married. So you cannot argue like that. And mind you, this is the kind of argument we are giving in a thought experiment. Could you get my point? If your argument says you are married in that drama and you cannot marry now, it is against the Indian penal code, your argument is a mistaken argument. Let me just talk about this. Look at Twin Earth of Patna. Let us suppose, he begins with this kind of statement. Let us suppose somewhere in the whole universe there is another Earth. That is Twin Earth, he calls, with every complexity like our Earth. You can, of course, stipulate such a thing. You can think of that. You can also think of, all laws of nature apply there also. Everything is almost identical. In this Earth, we know that water is a compound, is constituted of hydrogen and oxygen molecules in a chemical reaction, or you can say that water is made up of water, components, that is hydrogen and oxygen. In Twin Earth, there is also some substance which those people who live there call in their English as water. But that, let us assume, is constituted by XYZ, but not two gases, oxygen and hydrogen. Now, the thought experiment continues, and he tries to say, now somehow humans are able to go to that world, Twin Earth, and see that water, it has all the properties of drinking, this, that, etc., of water, and they call that water. You also call that water, but it is not really water constituted of hydrogen and oxygen. And similarly, if you discover that it is not made up of oxygen and hydrogen, you would say the word is ambiguous. It doesn't refer to X, Y, that stuff found there, even though you can drink it. So those people visit in Earth, and similarly they will find similar kind of problem. Now, I want to cut short the argument. Then there are further arguments by Putnam. Now, if Putnam has succeeded in showing the word water in Earth refers to this stuff, the word water on Twin Earth doesn't refer to this stuff there, though water is used, etc. You can say that reference, of course, if you're saying they refer to two different stuff, they are not referring to the same thing. So if you are talking about meaning of water, whatever this thing, the meaning here, meaning there will be different. And if you are saying that meaning is the same, okay, referent is different, then that leads to a different kind of problem in philosophy of language. So that apart. I am not talking about what all the problems we can solve, but please note here,
हाँ repeat नहीं होगा
how does,
हाँ
Putnam succeed in his argument? What Putnam is doing, he is stipulating first that water on twin earth is constituted by X, Y, Z. Why did you agree with him? Why should I agree with Putnam? You cannot ask this question. Why? Because in language, any word can be defined any manner you like as a speaker of the language. You have the license to speak any manner you like. You can provide stipulative definition. But you have to consistently use that. Of course, Putnam uses that. He says water on twin earth is constituted by XYZ. He doesn't deviate. But when he concludes the water refers to H2O on this planet and water in twin earth refers to XYZ or something else, okay, then the word is ambiguous. If he says, then what he is doing is he is coming out of his stipulation and giving the analysis of his stipulated example. This is a fallacy. He should be either speaking within stipulated world and then talking about, in that case, yes, water on earth is constituted by hydrogen and oxygen. Water on twin earth is constituted by X, Y, Z. They mean different things. And that is two different languages. That is two different kind of worldview. There is no ambiguity. Okay. If what, okay, in fingering in computer Linux language means is, checking whether someone is there on another server, that is the technical meaning of that word there. And fingering, in our ordinary metaphorical language, troubling someone, let us take that kind of sense. I'm fingering my friend whether he is there. So I'm troubling my friend here. That would be the meaning in normal language. But in computer language, you are checking whether your friend is there logged in. There is no problem at all. But in computer language, there is no problem. Or if you're speaking that specialized language, Linux language, absolutely no problem. It is not ambiguous. It is not blameworthy kind of thing. It is not a kind of, suspicious kind of statement that you're making. But in our ordinary language, if you understand it, so what you're doing is language appropriately used will not create problem. A thought, experiment is a specialized kind of thing. For example, look at another example. I wouldn't take all the examples because time is too much. I have taken already too much time, but I wanted to make this important point. So Russell's example, the whole world is created 5 minutes ago. In the computer world, you can create a file with, if you want to tell your professor that you had already worked upon the assignment on Friday itself, you just change the date of your file. Give the date of Friday and tell your professor, no, sir, my, paper was ready. I could have submitted my assignment on Friday itself. But what can I do? Internet didn't work. So I'm giving it today to you. So if the professor says, I won't accept Friday was the last date to submit your assignment, you can create and give him as if it is created on Friday. Similarly, you have to expand this to the whole world with all its complexities, even with your memory history book, everything is created 5 minutes back. How do you falsify it? You cannot talk anything more than 5 minutes back because you stipulated 5 minutes back everything is created. If that is true, the other one cannot be true. Therefore, you cannot falsify. So, in other words, what you have created, for example, similar tool is used by, Patnam also when he is talking about brain in a vat. All of us are brain in a vat. You cannot say brain in a vat refers to reality. All of us are true, living in reality, but a brain in a vat cannot say this because it is not in reality, and so on, etc. It is self-contradictory, etc. So, in other words, a thought experiment stipulates something. When you came out of thought experiment is not made clear to you, you are carried away by the language of the philosopher, and a trap is created to you. You don't have clarity, and therefore you think a profound argument is advanced. Sorry to say, many of these thought experiments are faulty because the distinction I have made, artificial language or the spatial language will have a different meaning. Don't get surprised why they have it, because every user, every philosopher has the you know autonomy of defining the world in a certain way, and by definition that stipulated world is true, and therefore you cannot contradict the very supposition, and that is your trap. Therefore, the opening principle, that is stipulation, and closing principle, the language, the discourse, where it ended, should be made clear in your language, in your discourse, in a philosophical discourse, and then come to the analysis. You have many, many puzzles created by thought experiments will be solved in this manner, and well, clarity will dawn and philosophical problems are dissolved. Thank you very much for listening to me carefully without showing any boredom. Thank you. And I will come if there are questions, if you are patient. I will
Thank
come.
you. Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful and intriguing insight. And I'm sure that so many questions, clarifications, and doubts are awaiting. So I would request all the participants to be very crisp and quick. And I would also request Professor K.C. Pandey to take the question answer session further. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mansi. Thank you. So questions are invited. Anybody can ask questions. I have got some questions in the chat. So, but I suppose that I can take some questions. So, anybody who wishes to ask any question can directly ask. And I think if there are many questions, as I have seen that there are many questions, it was thought-provoking talk, and it was wonderful listen. Different kinds of certainty, that is logical, empirical, and metaphysical. And in particular, I would like to say that that parable of falling from the roof and landing in a place where one realizes that one is not dead. This parable actually is applicable to so many life situations even now, and where you feel that you have committed a blunder where there was no going to get success out of that, but then you realize that you have not committed that much blunder, and you come out of that. So maybe like this parable is very much significant today, and wonderful to listen about New Delhi and Kanpur and Karnataka and IIT Bombay words. It's so nice to listen this talk. So questions are invited. Maybe like we can take many questions, and then would request Professor Bhatt to respond, or if he likes, he can take one-to-one questions. So it depends upon questions and intensity of questions and the number of questions. So questions are invited.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Pandey. I could see that there are many questions here. Okay.
Sometimes,
Let me, you are able to hear me, right?
yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, I will first read and understand the question and then respond. First question, natural or naturalized language in case of the child you mentioned. But what is true of our pets also? So are they the same? Then can my pet dog of my parrot perform a thought experiment? Well, this question is slightly misplaced. Child, I said, develops solipsism. Even Wittgenstein has talked about. Some scholars do talk about Wittgenstein is a solipsist at a certain level, and he private language he denied, of course, yet he could be interpreted as a solipsist. And if you do so, of course, a different thing will follow. A solipsist, child is a solipsist, I said, in the sense it doesn't know have natural language, it doesn't know public language, so it doesn't socialize yet. At that level, it is solipsist. Slowly it starts interacting with parents, with friends, and so on. It learns the natural language. Language is public. Wittgenstein has given very clear arguments. You follow the rules, rules are public, and so on and so forth. And then once you have the language, fully developed language, you could conduct thought experiment. There is no problem at all. Because thought experiment, in order to conduct thought experiment, you must be able to stipulate. You must be able to suppose something other than what is true by definition or true naturally. So you must be able to have that ability to stipulate. Once you learn that, if you learn how to think in a systematic manner, a logical argument can be developed. A thought experiment is very possible. I doubt whether dogs and parrots can develop a language where stipulation can be made, where rule governed behavior is possible. And as you could say, that the stipulation is very essential for any thought experiment. I doubt very much whether they can have thought experiments. They could have rudimentary thoughts in the sense that you respond. The child responded to parents, to the toy, or to the chocolate. That level of responding is possible. Rudimentary language is possible. All animals know their enemies. Spontaneously, they run away. They know how to. Even the cat, when the dog chases it, it frightens by increasing its size, sort of increasing, all the hairs will stand and it gives a ferocious look. So that is responding, threatening the dog. And some dogs get threatened, of course. So it is saved. Suddenly, quickly, it climbs the tree and saves itself. So that is a kind of response. But I don't think language is fully developed, and therefore thought experiment cannot be there. So there is no problem of including them as philosophers in your list. Thank you. Yeah. Second, evolved and deliberated, constructed as in logic, but then even the child's learned language would have to count in natural language as it has not able to see further. E, what is that?
Can I speak the question, sir? It will
Yeah,
be
yeah.
permission.
Yeah.
Sir, my concern is that once we make a distinction between the natural and artificial language, so in
Okay.
that case, every natural language in some other context becomes the artificial language, isn't it?
Why?
Because the way I read it is that in artificial language, we have to understand rules first and then come to the play. Whereas in natural language, the rules are learned through the process of evolution. Am I making the correct kind of distinction or not?
Suppose I agree with you.
Then what you are calling as the natural language of a child, let's say my child. So for Hindi and English are natural languages for my child. But suppose if he tries to learn Greek, then for the first time he has to learn the grammars, the rule and other requirements. Only then he can be fluent in Greek language. So
Okay.
will not that language become artificial for him? Thank you, sir.
No. So Greek is natural language, like that all the languages in the world which could be called or which are called mother tongue by that kind of definition, they are natural languages. One can pick up 2 languages, 3 languages, 10 languages and so on. So they remain natural languages, they don't become artificial. The language game is an artificial language. Chess game language, for example, it is a specialized language. Doctor's language. Some, terrorists develop certain sign language, but they are converted into natural language. So they are all short forms, like, when dictation is taken, steno will, he has a sign language, but they can be converted into natural language. So like this, the artificial language can be converted into natural language and could be understood. That is the way we understand actually. Otherwise, how do I learn the rules of chessboard, the different pieces? I learn in terms of natural language. So, but the chess language, what it means in chess game, what it means in natural language would be entirely different. They are not the same.
So there is a question,
so in
sir.
Greek, huh?
There is a question from Diksha Shukla. So
Okay.
She is a PhD student from Department of Philosophy. So hello Diksha.
Hello, sir.
Now you can
Good evening, sir.
You can on your video also. You can ask question.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, am I audible and visible?
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Okay, sir. I have 2 questions regarding the session. Sir, my first question is, how for the laws of nature is applicable in a possible world? As we know, laws of nature are true, necessary, and universal. And the possible world is neither true, necessary, and nor universal. And my query regarding this is that how far we could relate this with the argument of Sankhya that they assert regarding Prakriti and Purusha as only an intelligent thing can give birth to an intelligent thing, not an unintelligent thing. So, sir, how could we apply a natural law to a possible world which is not real? And my second question is, sir, what is a plausible word, as sir has said? Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir. So she has asked 2 questions. Yes.
Yeah. I am audible, I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So how the law of nature is applicable in the possible world, since it applies necessarily. All right. Now, in a possible world, if it is not applicable, I said it is a fictional world. Okay? If law of nature is not applicable, it is a fictional world. And there, of course, like my dream where I fall down, yet I don't break my bones. Right? From a top building, 10th floor maybe. So law of gravitation is not applicable there. I said, like this, it will become, and if it becomes, the argument, whatever you construct using a possible world, will not apply to actual world, because actual world is governed by law of nature. Okay, and saying that you can jump from 10th floor, yet you will not die, I guarantee you, because in my possible world, it didn't happen. Can you say this? It will be a stupid thing to say that. And anybody who tries that also is stupid thing anyway. So I said it applies in a plausible world. Plausible, that means it could any day become real. If it is a detective film that you are going through, if there is a narration of certain things, and in the detective film, police is doing CID inquiry, some other police inquiry. One version is it was a suicide, another version it is a murder. Okay, and in one version suicide where the person who died took poisonous drink. By taking poisonous drink, one dies, which is actual world. In the stipulated world, alternative account also, he dies if he takes poison. But he didn't know that it was a poison. His friend left a Coca-Cola or some drink for him on his table, saying that when you have time, you could take this drink. I bought 2 bottles, one for me, one for you. I took mine. This is for you. He kept it there. And then he drank when he was thirsty and died. And he drank and he died. It was poisonous. They could establish, if they do so, that alternative becomes the actual. It is a suicide case. But the other alternative, that drink was kept by his friend there to kill him. If that could be proved, that became the actual world. Both alternatives were plausible worlds. Only one could be true, and only one became declared as true by the Supreme Court or High Court judges, and he was given maybe capital punishment or lifetime imprisonment and so on. So both didn't become true. Only one became true, but both were plausible worlds, both where you believe that in both cases, law of nature applies. There is no exception possible. If law of nature doesn't apply, the person could have said, why do you call me a murderer? I kept the poison, yes, I asked him to drink, but that poison became, amrita for him. Could become, no? If there is no law of nature, why should he die? He says his death is not because I put poison. So your argument doesn't succeed if I don't grant, the laws of nature in a plausible world. Why? How plausible? Second question. What is a plausible world? I said stipulated world where you are conceiving. See, when I talk about tomorrow, when I say tomorrow, this particular cancer patient is very likely to die. He cannot survive. Or this COVID patient will not be able to survive more than one more day. Suppose a doctor conclusively states it. If you are interested in making his will, etc., please complete that job today itself. Suppose the doctor says this. What is he doing? He is conceiving of tomorrow with all laws of nature, but it is a plausible world. It's not yet actual. The person is not dead. You can still make a will of his, maybe if he's conscious, he can sign also, perhaps everything would be legal. But tomorrow, if you want to make it, you'll not be able to do it, maybe after his death. So, this is the kind of the world I am imagining when I'm talking about plausible world, where all the laws are applicable, but applicable, they are not applied, because they are not actual now. They will be applied, then it is actual.
Wonderful, wonderful,
So
sir. Wonderful.
plausible world can only become actual. Simple, mere possible world will not become actual,
Very
because you will still, yeah.
wonderful, sir. Very nice, very logical. And there is Dr. Rajni Srivastava, Philosophy Department, Lucknow University. She is she teaches in Department of Philosophy, Lucknow University, sir. She has one query, small query. Rajni ma'am, you can ask your question.
May I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sir, I have some clarification about the concept of language as necessarily a public language because it is rule governed and rules are always public. Yes, it is true that the main function of language is to impart information and communication. But suppose, and for this purpose, rules must be public. But suppose I wish to talk to myself only. So I construct a language that confined to me, and it has also rules, but rules are not public. Isn't it possible?
Okay. So this is the question, right? Yeah. I am not actually entering the debate language is private, public, but I did. I did, of course, in my notes. I think I didn't include here. The language, public language, and private language controversy, I don't believe. Why? Because it is not either or situation at all. It is not law of excluded middle that is applicable here. Language could be private as well as public. The public language can be used privately too. When people use code language, for example, these terrorists who have developed a code language for communicating to another terrorist or whatever, okay, that is, privately used. The public AJ Ayer's paper on language is private or public. He refers to code language and so on. You could look at that. The point I'm trying to make is, for me, language is both private as well as public. Solipsist child becomes a socialized citizen, and it can use solipsistically, it can use publicly also. There are some people, in order to mug up certain things, they might be, talking to themselves, or, shouting or singing. All these things are possible. And you do understand first before telling others what you're saying. That is how intention first comes. You want to say something to others, then use the language and tell them. So it is not necessary that you utter something and while uttering, you know what you have uttered. Sorry, if that were the case, you would have blundered many times in your life. That doesn't happen for a careful speaker. So intention, what to speak, you decide, and then you speak. It is not automatically, I spoke today, I plan to speak, Well, here and there I might have missed some point or added some points and so on. But yet the scheme, the general outline was ready, and my lecture was ready in essence. And then while speaking, I developed the arguments, filled in the details. So intention can come first, and if the intention can come first, your private language can come first, and then you make it public using the natural language. Yes, rules have to be followed, otherwise others cannot make sense of what you are saying. In private language, you might be using rules also that is spontaneously used. You are not even aware which use of language that you're using. Say, when you are learning English first, for example, for most of the Indians, you first construct the sentence in your mother tongue, then translate into English, and very carefully the grammar of English you care for and put it in that way. I found Hindi easier to learn rather than English because kartru, karma, kriyapada, that is subject, object, and then verb. That is my mother tongue. Kannada also has in that sequence. And in English, all kinds of ways of speaking. Those prepositions, understanding preposition itself is so difficult. We have prepositions, some rough equation, of course, but we have prathama, dvitiya, etc., etc. So there is difficulty in constructing English sentence, but over the years, spontaneously it happens. You have internalized those rules. So speaking to yourself, you don't explicitly know the rules. Spontaneously it comes to you. Once you have naturalized your learned language, mother tongue of someone else, but you are comfortable with this language now. So in that sense, yes, private language, public language distinction, I don't want to retain, but you should be expert in both. Only then both can be used very comfortably, and also philosophical argument can be developed using them. Thank you.
So, sir, there is two more questions we can should we take
Sure,
two?
sure.
So
I'm not tired.
great, sir, great. One question is from our Bhaskar Bhattacharya, that LWPS member, Bhaskar Bhattacharya from Guwahati.
Okay.
And hello, Bhaskar. He has asked.
Yeah, yes.
You can ask your question. Yeah.
So, your chat box. So, okay, at first, I would like to say something to our sir, respected sir. Yes, sir, we are very thankful to you for giving a very interesting lecture. Sir, one quotation given by Wittgenstein. Sir, I want to
Sure.
read that philosophy is a battle against the bewitchment of intelligence by human language. So, sir, your concluding one, the last part of your lecture, delivering lecture, I think you have given that philosophy is a free kind of thinking. So that bewitchment of intelligence by human language, philosophers have that have freedom to use any means kind of language in a way that is a philosophy of means form of life that language is giving us. So, sir, I have given my view in chat box. I think, sir, Professor Pandey, it is there
Yeah, yes, there.
in the chat. Yes.
He had just commented something, sir, like Wittgenstein.
I'm just trying to find it.
Yeah. He has just commented at something like trying to find out resemblance between your perspective and that of Wittgenstein, so far as bewitchment of language is concerned by means of language, bewitchment of
Yeah,
intelligence.
yeah, yeah. Right, right. No, but another spirit, in this context, I would like to, again, Wittgensteinian thing, in language, everything is open. Look at that. Putnam has created a certain kind of riddle using natural language, thought experiment, and so on. Or Russell has created, a kind of philosophical thought experiment. So same is about others who created thought experiment and posed a problem. But then, if somebody is finding a way out, the fly out of the fly bottle, again Wittgensteinian kind of this thing. Who is doing it? We only do it. Through which we are doing it? Using natural language only we are doing it. So, language can be used in a multifaceted ways. And some people use it to trap us, or they also themselves get trapped by these bewitchments, and some are trying to find the way out. That is quite true. And your Wittgensteinian quotation is quite applicable, and also then try to find solution to the kind of problem that we are facing. Most of the problems we create and then solve. It is like throw the sand or um, earth in the air and claim that you can't see. Obviously, you have created the problem. You should find a solution.
Okay,
Yeah.
sir. Thank you. Sir, one more thinking in my mind. I have given in my chat box. So, sir, can there be an issue of possible war in the domain of science? And also it can be viewed that is the issue of possible war confined only to the business of philosophy? For instance, today's scientists are too much concerned with quantum physics, or we can think of uncertainty principle in science. So, sir,
Right.
what do you think in this regard?
Yeah. Some people do talk about uncertainty principle and then go on. There is a slight problem here. Uncertainty principle is what? It says that if you know the position of electron, where it is at time t1, you will not be able to predict the exact location of that particular electron at time t2. There is some duration, whatever the duration is. Or vice versa. If you are able to predict where the positioning of electron is at T2, you would not have succeeded in telling where it was at T1. In other words, you cannot precisely predict the movement of electrons because it moves so fast. How fast? It moves perhaps as fast as the light waves, because that is your limitation of measuring. So you can measure one part but cannot measure the other one. Something of that kind is happening. That is the limit to your perceivable world, limit to your measurable world. That is one kind of point. That is an epistemic point that is made. From epistemic point, you cannot jump to ontology. It is an epistemic point. It is an epistemic thesis. But people are trying to jump to ontology. From perception, they would like to declare that the objectivity of the object. That cannot be done because, as all the Indian philosophers know it fully well, there can be perceptual error. There can be problem, hallucination, imagination, all kinds of things. Therefore, you cannot do. So, this argument, if you use from, this uncertainty principle to ontology, there will be a error of this kind. The other one, ontologically, quantum jump, quantum physics, and so on. Over there is again uncertainty because you can know only quantum jumps. You don't know when the change has taken place. For example, try to define what is change. You will not be able to do it because if you have to understand what is change, you have to use a predicate, and then that statement is static, not change. What was at time t1? What is at t2? There are two static states, and you just jump that and say that that is the change. You have only talked about the earlier position of the thing and the next position of the thing, and you say it has changed. You have to assume that it has changed. You have no proof of change. Same that is because of human perception. You might know that there is something called spacious present. What it means,
Yes.
1/15th of a second, if something changes, you cannot notice. 1/16th of a second, if something is changing, you will notice it. For example, fan, if when it moves slowly, then you can see its wings. And if the fan is moving very fast, you see a disk. That means it is moving faster than 1/15th of a second. That means 1/60, no, yeah, it is moving 2, 3 wings will come within 1/15th of a second. Therefore, you are not able to distinguish. This is the principle using which we have succeeded in manufacturing or making, developing the tool called filmmaking, movies. There are so many. Amitabh Bachchan is hitting.
Yes.
Within this 2 seconds, you would have screened
Yes.
35 pictures of different at various stages. That is the way it works. That spacious present is human psychological limitation. Using that,
Yes.
quantum physics tries to say there is quantum jump. There is no jump.
Yes.
It is your
Yes.
perception of two states by which there is so much of quantity change. And then you call it quantum jump. It is an epistemic thesis which you are applying to ontological state. The fundamental error, philosophical error, going from epistemic thesis to ontological thesis, like the blunder that philosophers committed from deriving existence from essence, ontological argument of Saint Anselm.
Thank you, sir. There are
So thank you so much, sir.
okay, Bhaskar. Thank
Thank
you
you
for
so much, sir.
okay.
Okay,
Bhaskar.
thank you so much, and also thank you so much, Professor Pandey and the department. So for listening a very wonderful lecture from our sir. So thank you, sir, once again. Thank you.
Welcome.
There are small queries, two more queries, very small queries,
Sure, sure.
and they are about the concept of natural language. Uh, Concept of natural language.
Okay.
One query is that why we call it natural language when we acquire it. Though we acquire a language, then why are we calling it as a natural language? This is a small query from K. Om Narayan Rao, I suppose.
Okay.
And then the second is, sir, that whether all natural languages are philosophical languages. This question is very interesting because sometimes we say that like some words in Sanskrit, like karma is like used in the sense always as duty in older texts like Vedas and Upanishads. So how will you interpret like this these queries, like whether natural language is always philosophical language, number one, and number two, like K. Om Narayan Rao, and that is K. Om Narayan Rao asked question that how could we call natural language as a natural language even though we acquire it. So though we acquire it, why should we call it natural? Like these are the queries.
Yeah. The first one first, the natural language, I just use the term mother tongue. So mother tongue, that is all mothers, you would have had your mother, of course, and first language that you pick up, first language that you pick up, that is usually called mother tongue. Your mother might speak only in English and you picked up English, though your mother had Hindi as mother tongue. All these are possibilities. Okay, now the natural language used, because only when artificial language had to be introduced. The artificial language was introduced in computers as well as biological positivists to talk about, philosophical language which has clarity, absolute clarity, no ambiguity. Formal language, another way. Logic is formal language. So formal language, artificial language, you know, technical language versus natural language. The everyday language is called natural language, and artificial languages or formal language, all these have to be acquired. Only a deaf and dumb person who doesn't know only sign language he knows, even he might have to acquire certain things. But natural languages are called, mother tongues are called natural language. All natural languages, you can use thought experiments in them, and you can be a philosopher without any problem, because all philosophical problems can be conceived in any natural language. If it is not fully developed language, you might have to develop those languages, which can be very easily done. Now, artificial language, all these are acquired. Natural language also is acquired. That is not the criterion on which you distinguish different languages. The criterion is, the artificial language, or these are more involved, explicitly stated laws are given to you when you are learning. Okay, so if I have to make use of the word constitutive in all the artificial language, the rules are constitutive. They give the meaning to words. You cannot create meaning without the rules. So in artificial language, you have to explicitly give the rules. Otherwise, the words won't have meaning. Or even in formal language, any, the artificial language or computer language and so on. But in natural language, you don't give rules. The child acquires, learns innately all the rules, if I have to quote Chomsky, in 48 months. So some of the rules may not be constitutive at all. Natural kind terms, you would not have learned using the definition first. You don't know the definition at all, maybe. So therefore, this particular kind of thing. The second question I already answered. If people say that philosophy has to be done only in Sanskrit, otherwise you have not understood the problems posed by the ancient Indian scholars. It is misunderstanding of the way philosophical problems are arising and they are solved. It's a sheer kind of faith, or I don't want to call it faith, simply habitual thinking. Their teachers told this, they are also telling everybody. There is no language is such a way that you cannot create that particular philosophical problem in another natural language, unless it is about ambiguity of that term in that language. Well, in that case, you have to clear that point. Ambiguity is not a big philosophical problem. It can always be solved.
I think we have taken all the questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to invite Dr. Rajni Srivastava to deliver a vote of thanks.
Hello.
जी मैडम.
Thank you, Mansi. On the behalf of Department of Philosophy and on myself also, I wish to take this opportunity to offer my thanks to all the members of this webinar. First of all, I wish to congratulate Professor P.R. Bhatt and also thank to him for his academic brilliance. Your selection of content, your style of presentation and clarity all are marvelous. So we are thankful to you, sir. We all are benefited from your presentation. Thank you very much, sir. I wish to thank Professor K.C. Pandey, Head Department of Philosophy and convener of this Saturday webinar for his initiative and effort, because without his initiative and effort, it would be impossible for our department to organize this weekly seminar. I'm thankful to the coordinating team of this webinar. I see our young scholars are taking this responsibility and they need a big thanks. Thank you. I also like to offer my thanks to all the participants who have joined the event and made it successful. I'm thankful to all the participants, scholars, students, teachers, and my colleagues. Thank you to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. With this, we close today's Saturday seminar, and we expect something more in the next one. Thanks to everybody for joining this.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.